Not every story that stops a television show is heavy. Not every moment that gets replayed a million times and shared across every platform and sent from person to person with the message, "You have to see this," is about pain or injustice or the complicated weight of being human in a difficult world. Some of those moments, some of the best ones, honestly, are about nothing more and nothing less than a person being so entirely, helplessly, catastrophically funny that the room around them simply cannot function anymore. This is one of those stories. It is about a man named Gerald. It is about one answer he gave on a game show that was so spectacularly, magnificently wrong that it shut down the taping, folded Steve Harvey in half, sent the studio audience into the kind of laughter that crosses over into something that requires medical attention, and became one of the most watched clips in Family Feud history within 24 hours of the episode airing. No drama, no confrontation, no lesson about the weight of the world. Just a man, a microphone, and a moment of such pure and innocent ridiculousness that the only human response to it was to laugh until you could not breathe anymore. If you need that right now, and honestly, when do you not need that, you are in exactly the right place. Like this video and subscribe before we go any further, because joy is a thing worth coming back for, and we serve it every single week. Now let us talk about Gerald Washington and the greatest wrong answer in Family Feud history. Gerald Washington was 52 years old when he walked onto the Family Feud stage in the winter of 2024, and from the first moment he appeared in that studio, it was clear that Gerald was operating on a slightly different frequency than the rest of the room. Not a worse frequency. Not a frequency that was causing any problems. Just different. The kind of different that happens when a person has spent their entire life being the most entertaining person at any gathering they attend, and has fully accepted this as their identity and their responsibility. Gerald was a retired postal worker from Charlotte, North Carolina, who had spent 31 years delivering mail and, by his own accounting, had used approximately 29 of those years to develop the richest, most elaborate inner comedy life that any postal route in Mecklenburg County had ever produced. He had a story for everything. He had an observation about everything. He had a way of saying something completely ordinary that made it sound like the setup to a joke. Because for Gerald, everything was the setup to a joke, and the punchline was whatever happened next. His wife of 28 years, Diane, was 50 years old and worked as a dental hygienist. She had the specific, practiced energy of someone who has spent 28 years being married to Gerald Washington, and has therefore developed an extremely finely tuned system for managing him in public. A system that involved a combination of strategic preemptive warnings, real-time redirects, and a look that Gerald had once described in a family story as the look that says, "I love you and I will end you," and those two things are not contradictory. She loved her husband with the complete and uncomplicated love of someone who has seen a person at their absolute worst and their absolute best, and has decided that the whole package is worth it. And she found him genuinely funny in the way that spouses who have lasted 28 years in good humor sometimes still find each other, with the specific laugh of someone who knows all your material and still thinks you are hilarious. Their son DeAndre was 26 tall, and carried himself with the patient, slightly long-suffering grace of a firstborn child, who has spent his entire conscious life being Gerald Washington's son, and has made peace with what that means. He was a middle school football coach and PE teacher, which meant that nothing Gerald did or said in public could surprise him anymore, because Gerald was essentially 12 middle schoolers in one adult body, and DeAndre had spent 4 years managing exactly that demographic. Their daughter Jasmine was 23, a graduate student in communications, who had the quick analytical mind of someone who had grown up watching her father operate in social spaces, and had involuntarily developed a very sophisticated understanding of comedy structure, crowd dynamics, and the specific mechanics of why certain things are funny. She was the one who, every time Gerald said something at a family dinner that made the table fall apart, would quietly explain afterward exactly why it had worked, which Gerald found both flattering and slightly unnerving. The fifth family member was Gerald's younger brother Raymond, 48, who was a high school principal, and who described his relationship with Gerald as 30 years of being the straight man in someone else's sitcom, and I have accepted my role. They had applied to Family Feud because Gerald had been asking Diane to apply for 11 years. 11 years of Diane, we would be so good on Family Feud. 11 years of Diane, I am telling you, I know how people think. 11 years of Diane, Steve Harvey and I are basically the same person. This last claim was one that the rest of the family disputed enthusiastically, and that Gerald defended with a confidence that was inversely proportional to the available evidence. Diane had finally agreed after Gerald retired from the post office, partly because she loved him and partly because she had run out of counter-arguments after 11 years and partly because she had calculated correctly that saying yes would be significantly less exhausting than continuing to say no. They had practiced. Gerald had been especially thorough in his preparation. He had watched episodes, studied answer patterns, and delivered several speeches to his family about strategy and mindset that Raymond later described as the most confident I have ever seen anyone be about something they fundamentally misunderstood. The opposing family that day was the Kim family from Los Angeles, 5 first- and second-generation Korean Americans who were fast, coordinated, and very clearly there to win money rather than to have a philosophical experience about the nature of game shows. They were excellent. They were also, unfortunately for them, going to spend the next hour of their lives as supporting characters in Gerald Washington's story, which was not what they had planned, but which they handled with good grace. The first 2 rounds went well for both families. Gerald was good, genuinely good, not just entertaining. He had real instincts about survey answers, the kind that come from decades of talking to everyone on a postal route and developing an unusually comprehensive sense of what American people think about what. He gave answers that hit. He celebrated each one with a physical reaction that required slightly more space than a game show podium traditionally provides, which made the audience laugh every time. Steve Harvey was clearly delighted by him. They had a chemistry in those early exchanges that came from Steve recognizing in Gerald a specific kind of person, the person who was born to be in a room like this and knows it, and leaning into it rather than managing it. By the end of the second round, Gerald Washington was the most beloved person in that studio who was not Steve Harvey, and he knew it, and the knowledge was doing absolutely nothing to calm him down. Then came the round that changed everything. It was the third round. The category, and this is important, was things you find in a bathroom. Standard Family Feud territory, completely reasonable. 100 people had been surveyed. The top answers were predictable: toilet, sink, toothbrush, towels, soap, mirror, toilet paper. The kind of answers that most people, when asked to name things found in a bathroom, would arrive at within approximately 3 seconds of thinking about it. This was not a trick question. This was not an ambiguous category. This was one of the most straightforward prompts in the history of a show built on straightforward prompts. Gerald stepped up to the buzzer for the face-off. The Kim family's representative, a sharp 28-year-old named Danny, stepped up opposite him. Steve Harvey looked at both of them with the bright, encouraging energy of a man who has presided over thousands of face-offs and who knows that the most important thing in this moment is the speed of the instinctive answer, not the quality of the deliberated one. "Name something you find in a bathroom," Steve said. Gerald hit the buzzer. He hit it fast. He hit it with the confidence of a man who has spent 11 years telling his wife that he was made for this exact moment. He hit it with the certainty of someone who already knows the answer before the question is finished, which is, in theory, the ideal state for a Family Feud face-off. He opened his mouth, and he said with complete conviction and without a single beat of hesitation, "A bear." The studio did not react immediately. There was approximately 1 full second of total silence, the kind of silence that a room produces when it has received information that it cannot yet categorize. Steve Harvey's mouth opened slightly. He looked at Gerald. He looked at the cards in his hand. He looked back at Gerald. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who is trying very hard to maintain his professional composure while his entire internal processing system is rebooting. "A bear," Steve said. "A bear," Gerald confirmed, confidently, without apology or uncertainty, with the specific energy of a man who has given what he believes to be an excellent answer and is waiting for the board to confirm it. "Gerald." Steve's voice was very careful, very measured, the voice of someone who is managing something. "A bathroom bear?" "Yes," Gerald said, "because of the rugs." He paused. "You know, the bear rug in the bathroom." The 1-second silence that followed that explanation was of a different quality than the first silence. This silence had texture. It had layers. It was the silence of 200 people simultaneously trying to construct the version of the world in which Gerald's answer made sense, discovering that they could not construct it, and then beginning to understand that this was the funniest thing that had happened in this building in a very long time. Steve Harvey turned away from Gerald. He turned to face the audience. He put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders started moving. He turned back to Gerald. He turned away again. He walked 3 steps stage left, stopped, put his hands on his knees, and laughed with the full, helpless, infrastructure-threatening laughter of a man who has completely lost the battle and is fine with it. The audience, which had been holding on by a thread, followed him over the edge. 200 people went at once, the way a crowd goes when someone with authority gives them permission, and the sound in that studio was less like audience response and more like a weather event. Diane, at the podium, had her face in both hands. Not with embarrassment exactly, she had been married to Gerald for 28 years, and her capacity for embarrassment had been fully depleted somewhere in the early 2000s. It was more the specific gesture of someone who, in the moment their husband says the thing they have somehow both expected and not expected, needs to briefly separate their eyes from the evidence. DeAndre, beside her, was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man communing with whatever higher power is responsible for the circumstances of one's birth. Jasmine had turned completely around and was facing the back wall, her shoulders shaking. Raymond was the only member of the family who appeared to be making a genuine effort to maintain composure, and he was failing at it in a way that made it very clear the effort was happening, which was somehow funnier than if he had simply laughed. Gerald, for his part, was looking around the studio with the expression of a man who has said something he believed to be correct and is watching the room's reaction with genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness, as if the data he is collecting might eventually help him understand where the disconnect occurred. He did not look mortified. He did not look like he wanted to disappear. He looked interested. He looked like a man running a small internal diagnostic that he was confident would resolve shortly. Steve Harvey eventually, and it took a while, found his way back to a functional state. He walked back to center stage. He looked at Gerald. He opened his mouth once, thought better of whatever he was going to say, and closed it again. He breathed. He tried once more. "Gerald," he said, "brother." Another pause. "There are no bears in bathrooms." "There could be," Gerald said. "Decorative ones." Steve turned to the audience with an expression that said, "You are all witnesses to this." The audience responded with a fresh round that took another 45 seconds to fully subside. Somewhere in the back of the studio, a crew member who had been doing this job for 9 years said, to nobody in particular, that she was going to need a minute. "The bear rug," Steve said eventually, returning to it with the commitment of a man who has decided he is going to understand this. "In the bathroom." "People have bear rugs in their bathrooms," Gerald said, with a patience that suggested he felt he was the one doing the explaining in this situation. "My uncle had one. Growing up, it was a whole thing." Steve Harvey looked at Gerald with an expression that contained several emotions simultaneously: affection, incredulity, a kind of professional admiration, and something that looked very much like the specific joy of a man who has just been given a gift he did not know he needed. He shook his head slowly. He looked at the audience. He looked back at Gerald. "Your uncle," Steve said, "had a bear rug in his bathroom." "Green bathroom," Gerald specified. "The rug matched." There are moments in comedy, professional comedy, the kind that people spend years learning to manufacture, that never quite reach what happened in the next 30 seconds of that studio. The specificity of green bathroom, the absolute certainty with which it was delivered, the image it produced. The fact that Gerald had not only said a bear, but had escalated to a decorative bear that matched the bathroom's color scheme. Steve Harvey put his forehead on his arm and made a sound that was not quite a word in any language. Raymond, the principal who had been hanging on to his composure with both hands, let go. Diane removed her hands from her face and started laughing, the specific, genuine, full-body laugh of a woman who knew this was coming and is still not entirely prepared for it. DeAndre sat down on the floor of the stage, which is not something that happens on Family Feud, but production chose not to intervene because the moment had clearly moved beyond the jurisdiction of normal protocol. Danny Kim, the opposing family's representative who was still standing at the face-off buzzer, having technically won the face-off by default, was laughing too, genuinely, without any performance of it, the laugh of someone who had come to win a game and found themselves inside something much better than a win. It took Steve Harvey 4 minutes to fully restore the taping to a functional state. 4 minutes, which the production team later confirmed was a personal record. In those 4 minutes, he made 3 separate attempts to compose himself, each of which collapsed when he made eye contact with Gerald, who was still standing at the buzzer looking mildly puzzled by the extended response, but fundamentally untroubled by the situation. The audience needed multiple settling periods. Crew members were seen holding onto fixed objects for stability. The medical team that is always on standby at tapings reportedly spent those 4 minutes in a heightened state of alert for a different reason than usual. When the game eventually resumed, Gerald was given a warm, genuine, wildly appreciated round of applause from the audience that had nothing to do with the game and everything to do with what he had just provided. Steve Harvey, resetting with the composure of a professional who has wrestled his laughter to the ground through sheer force of will, looked at Gerald and said, "I want you to know something. In all my years of hosting this show, and we are talking about a lot of years and a lot of people coming through here, I have never once, not one time, had someone answer a bear." "You're welcome," Gerald said. Steve Harvey turned to the cameras. "You're welcome," he repeated to the universe at large. The rest of the game was played in the specific elevated atmosphere that settles over a room after something truly, genuinely funny has happened, the lightened air of people who have collectively released something and are now moving through the space it left behind. Gerald continued to play well. He gave answers that hit. He celebrated each one. He was, throughout the remaining rounds, entirely and completely himself, which turned out to be more than enough. The Washington family and the Kim family both brought everything they had, and it was a closer game than the bear incident might have suggested, because it turned out that Gerald's instincts about how people think were, outside the specific category of bathroom wildlife, genuinely sound. The Washington family won. Not the fast money prize. They fell just short in the final round, finishing their fast money total at 181 points, which was a respectable performance, but not enough for the $20,000. What they won was something that you cannot put a dollar amount on, which is the shared knowledge of having been part of something that nobody in that studio was going to forget. The Kim family, who technically won the episode, graciously acknowledged this distinction in the post-game green room, with Danny telling Gerald that he was the highlight of their entire Family Feud experience, which Gerald received with the modest dignity of a man who knows this is true, but appreciates hearing it confirmed. The episode aired 5 weeks later. The clip of the bear answer hit the internet within 3 hours of the broadcast and began moving in the way that genuinely funny things move, fast and without friction, because there is no barrier to sharing something that makes people feel good. It was on every platform within 12 hours. It was on morning radio by the next day. Comedy writers shared it with the specific respect of professionals watching someone do something rare, the unscripted, unmanufactured, completely real version of the thing they spend careers trying to construct. Late-night hosts referenced it. Several stand-up comedians worked variations on it into sets. A clip compilation channel that had been dormant for 2 years reactivated specifically to post the full unedited segment, which the production team released after recognizing that the demand was unprecedented. The comment sections were something remarkable, not in the usual way of internet comment sections, in the way that sections go when the content is purely, cleanly joyful, and people come to add to the joy rather than contest anything. People shared their own stories of spectacular wrong answers given by family members in high-pressure moments. People tagged friends and family members with notes like, "This is you, and you would do this, and I have been waiting for exactly this video to send you." Several people wrote that they had been having a genuinely terrible week, and that the clip had been the first thing to make them laugh in days. One comment, shared several thousand times, said simply, "I did not know I needed a 52-year-old retired postman to confidently say, 'a bear' on national television to fix something broken in me, but here we are." Gerald Washington, back in Charlotte, watched the clip go viral with the specific delight of a man who has always known he was funny and is pleased that the record is now official. He was not embarrassed. He was not mortified. He was, if anything, more settled than ever in his sense of himself, because the world had now confirmed what he had always privately believed, which was that his instincts about what was going to be memorable were excellent even when, especially when, the specific thing he chose to say was a bear. He gave a brief phone interview to a local Charlotte news outlet in which he explained, at length, his uncle's bathroom, the bare rug, the green tile, the particular design aesthetic of that era in that household, and the reasonable chain of logic that had led him to his answer. The interviewer later said it was the most fun she had doing her job all year. Diane gave one comment to the same outlet. It was 4 words: "This is my life." Raymond, the principal, used the clip in a professional development session with his staff on the topic of recovering from unexpected situations with grace and humor. He said it was the most engaged his staff had ever been in a professional development session. Gerald, when he heard this, called Raymond and told him he was welcome and that he was happy to come in person and give the talk directly, which Raymond declined, which Gerald said he had expected. DeAndre went back to his football players the following Monday. Two of his seventh graders had seen the clip over the weekend. They greeted him at practice with the specific, merciless delight of middle schoolers who have found out something about an adult in their lives that gives them material. "Coach Washington," one of them said, "your dad said a bear." DeAndre, who had spent 26 years preparing for some version of this moment, looked at the kid and said, "I know, run your laps." He has told this story at every family gathering since. Jasmine, who had been facing the back wall of the studio when it happened, wrote a piece for her graduate communications program about the viral mechanics of the clip, specifically about why genuinely unscripted human moments spread differently and faster than manufactured content, and why the most effective comedy on the internet is almost always a person being completely, helplessly themselves in a situation that has gotten away from them. She got an A on the paper. She cited Gerald Washington in the bibliography under primary source. Gerald, when informed of this, said it was about time he got into academia. Steve Harvey talked about Gerald in an interview a month after the episode aired. He said that the bear answer was one of his favorite moments in his entire run as host, not because it was the funniest thing that had ever happened on the show, though it was in contention, but because of what came after it. He said what he would never forget was Gerald's face in the moment that followed, the absence of mortification, the complete, unruffled equanimity of a man who had given an answer he believed in and was simply waiting for the world to catch up with him. He said that kind of comfort in your own skin, the kind that does not require the room to validate what you said in order for you to feel good about having said it, was rarer than it looked and more valuable than most people gave it credit for. He said he had met thousands of people on that stage, and the ones he remembered were always the ones who were completely, entirely, unapologetically themselves, and that Gerald Washington was one of the finest examples of that quality he had ever encountered. He also said that he still, 6 months later, could not hear the word bathroom without his brain producing a bear, and that he had decided this was a gift rather than a problem. The thing about laughter, real laughter, the kind that takes you over before you have made the decision to laugh, is that it is one of the few purely connective experiences available to human beings. It does not require shared values or shared history or shared language in the deepest sense. It requires only a shared moment of recognition, that something has happened that is so perfectly, purely, helplessly funny that the only response available to a human body is the involuntary, physical, completely honest expression of joy. Gerald Washington gave that to a studio full of strangers, and then to a country full of people who needed it, and did not know they needed it until they found it in a 30-second clip of a retired postman confidently naming a bear as something found in a bathroom. He did not plan it. He did not perform it. He walked out there and he was himself, completely and without reservation, and what he was, what Gerald Washington has apparently always been, was exactly the kind of person that makes a room better by being in it. Exactly the kind of person who reminds you that the world contains this too. That alongside all the hard things and the complicated things and the things that require careful handling and serious attention, there is also a 52-year-old man from Charlotte who looked at a microphone and said a bear and meant it, and has not regretted it for a single day since. That is the whole story. That is all of it. A bear, a green bathroom, an uncle, a bear rug that matched, and the 28 years of Diane Washington that preceded and explain all of it. Some stories carry the weight of the world. This one carries the opposite, that specific, clean, weightless feeling of a laugh you did not see coming that left you lighter than you were before it arrived. Carry it somewhere useful. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you know a Gerald, if you have a Gerald in your life, someone who will say the bear in any situation and mean it with their whole chest, do not take them for granted. They are doing something for the room that the room cannot do for itself. They are making it possible to breathe. Leave a comment below telling us the most spectacularly wrong answer you or someone you know has ever given in a high-pressure moment, because this community's comment section deserves to be full of bear-level energy today. And if you are not already here with us, subscribe right now, because we bring stories like this every single week. Stories that make you think, stories that make you feel, and sometimes, on the very best days, stories that just make you laugh until you cannot see straight. We will see you in the next one.